My name is Greg McDaniel, and welcome back to another amazing episode of Real Estate Coach Uncensored.
And I'm Bernice Ross. We have an excellent show for you today called Post-Closing Problems, Lawsuits Waiting to Happen. It's one thing when you disclose something when the property is under contract, but when there's a problem that nobody knew about until after closing, boy, are you likely to get a lawsuit. Or if the buyers or the sellers, if either one of them discovers a problem after the close, you're much more likely to get sued. When I was at John Douglas Company, I was the executive director of training. And whenever the company got sued, they always subpoenaed me the attorneys would subpoena me for my training, for our training materials. And I've had to testify in court a number of times. And I've also had some firsthand experience, unfortunately, which I hope none of you ever have any firsthand experience with a lawsuit. But for many years, because of that, I used to teach a course called What You Fail to Disclose May Leave You Exposed. And so what we're going to be talking about today are some of the experiences that Greg and I have personally experienced. The first one is just totally off the wall. It's not something that we experienced personally, but our attorney for our firm told us about it. And of course, it ended up in the training. But before we get started, Greg, you've had a lot of experiences. Is there anything that you'd like to add?
You know what? One of the things that I've worked with, lots and lots of sellers, and they will ask me, Greg, do I have to disclose X? And I will say, 100,000% you do. Well, I don't want to. I don't care what you want. Yes, you have to disclose it. Disclose everything. And if you need more room on your documents, go get a yellow pad or a Word doc and keep writing. Provide all records of everything and anything done to this property, anything you know about it. If there's a nuisance of a howling dog next door, disclose there's a howling dog next door. So yes, I'm emphatic on that with my clients, and knock on wood, never been sued on that, thank God.
Well, that's, you're very fortunate. The guidance that we gave people in our training and in the CE course was this: if you ask, do I have to disclose? The answer is yes. Now, there are exceptions. There are certain, for example, in California, if there's been a death on the property from AIDS, you don't disclose that unless it's specifically asked. So again, you need to know what the disclosure requirements are in your state. And again, California, the lawsuits are primarily over disclosure. Other places in the country, they tend to be more on agency. But still, you still need to know how to disclose. Okay, so I have got the weirdest one I've ever heard, and this is it. So this transaction's about ready to close, and the sellers say, and this was a rural property, they say, oh, do you mind if we drop by to see Aunt Sally? She's buried in the backyard.
Oh my gosh. Seriously.
So I'm talking to the attorney for our firm who had been with CAR at the time this lawsuit came from the California Association when it came down. And he just was, we were sitting there kind of, we didn't hear how it got resolved because it was still like 5 years out to get into the courts. But here are some of the questions that he raised. First of all, was it legal for them to bury Aunt Sally there? It's real property, may have been.
Oh.
Second, did Aunt Sally convey with the property? Did she have to be relocated? Did they get the permits that were required? Were there any signs that Aunt Sally maybe was haunting the property?
Oh my gosh.
And since there was nothing on the transfer disclosure statement about this issue, were the sellers obligated to disclose it? I mean, we don't know how any of those were resolved, but that gives you an idea of the complexity of disclosure when you've got something weird going on. Greg, I've been seeing you, you're sitting there kind of shaking your head.
I'm sitting there, I'm like, these are really good questions. I mean, you can't wiggle out of these.
Well, that's the whole thing. It's, again, you've got the issues of conveyance, what's permitted. I mean, it's a great illustration of the kinds of questions you need to be asking as an agent in terms of disclosure. What we do know is that the buyers canceled the transaction, and that transaction didn't close. And I suspect they probably ended up relocating Aunt Sally off the property before they sold it next.
Yeah, I think that might be a wise idea. And it's incredible. One of the questions I ask consistently to my sellers and my buyers, you do it for both of them. And I say, okay, so we've gone over all these different questions. you told me a lot about the property. What is something you haven't told me that might affect the value or the perceived value of the future buyer? With anything that comes to mind, this is our time to really brainstorm together and let you guys put it down on paper. Because of course we can't touch those documents. Our hand cannot write these notes. They have to do that. But I was asked that question: what have I not asked, or something I don't know that I should know? And go from
A
there.
great question. I haven't heard anybody put it that way, because you're digging deeper, and a lot of times they'll give you the superficial things, but then by asking that going deeper, super great suggestion, Greg. Greg, you've got the next one. We don't have X-ray vision.
No, we do not, Bernice. And that's a very good lead in from going deep, because we are going to talk about something literally deep right now. There was one of the deals that our team did a number of years ago. I'm talking like 20 plus years ago, right? And there was a buyer, they were buying, we had the seller, and the buyer came in and wanted to buy the single family home on a half-acre piece of land. They couldn't wait. They loved it. Great street, everything matched up. They can put in, they wanted to build a pool. That was the whole reason they were making a move. So we go in, we get all, the whole deal went super smooth. And then we get a call that we were being notified that the buyers were, naming us in a lawsuit. We're like, what in the heck? And here's what found out. What they did is they started digging up the backyard for the pool. They found that the majority, if not probably the majority of the backyard was all covered in tires 6 feet deep. 6 feet deep of like, car tires, trucking tires. I mean, everything was down there, and they were livid. But the judge ruled in our favor, saying that you can't disclose something because you don't have X-ray vision, right? But you can definitely disclose everything that you do know, to the highest level of your professional ability and your client's ability. But you can't. I mean, I can't see through dirt. Can you?
Last time I checked.
Yeah, me neither. So just some stuff will come up, guys, but just do everything you possibly can.
Let's go on to number 3. When the title insurance has to unravel the deal, you still lose. And this, Greg, was the saddest situation I think I've ever bumped to personally in the business. And this was the deal I did in my second year in the business. I was still in my 20s. And I had the buyer. She was a lady who was 62. She was going to be retiring. She wanted to buy a little duplex to have a place to live and a place to have some income. So we put an offer on this duplex. It sold. And while the property was under contract, the 25-year-old listing agent was riding his bike and got hit by a car and died.
Oh.
And then it got worse. 2 days before closing, I get this call from this woman who is screaming at me that she's the real owner of the property, not this woman that we were under contract with. And, I told my broker, we called over to the title company. We spoke to an advisory title officer. If you're not familiar with that, those are people who can advise you on title issues, because we can't do this. We're not qualified to advise on title. So it's an actual attorney, and he looked at all the documentation. He says, everything's legit. We're prepared to issue a title policy to insure the property and, go ahead and close. I went ahead and contacted my client to make sure she wanted to, or she wanted to wait. And she says, no, she wanted to close the deal. And I mean, that's, it looked like everything was good. The loan was approved. Well, what happened, Greg, is the title company, this woman did hire an attorney. She wasn't very educated. I mean, she got snookered essentially. But what happened is her attorney had put a list pendants on the property, but the title company missed it. Okay, so the title shouldn't have conveyed.
Yeah.
But then what happened was this woman thought she was taking out a high, she needed money. She was taking out a high interest loan, and she thought she was signing loan documents, but in there was a grant deed. It wasn't just the trustee securing the loan. There was a grant deed transferring the property. So she had been scammed. And because the title company had missed the list pendants, this is what's happened. I've only seen a deal unravel once in all the years I've been in the business, but this is what happens. So the seller's policy essentially insured the buyer. So my buyer was made whole. She got all of her money back. the buyer's lender's policy paid back the loan that had been already recorded on the property. So the lender was made whole. Guess who was still on the hook when they sued everybody? My
Ooh,
broker and me.
I was like, there's only one answer on that one.
Yeah, exactly. And this was a time when E&O, there, I didn't even know what E&O was, it just wasn't out there in the universe as something that you needed. We were not in a particularly litigious environment at that point in time. So I ended up splitting the attorney's fees based upon my commission with my broker. But, we were on the short end of the stick, even though we did nothing wrong. We did everything right. And unfortunately, many suits take place that way. You do nothing wrong. You're just at the wrong time. This deal had the whammy on it. I couldn't believe, this wonderful young man got killed. And this woman who got taken advantage of, just everything was just super crazy on that one. Now you've got another couple tall tales that you bumped into, not so much tall tales, but regarding easements and encroachments. And these are common reasons that agents get into trouble about these things all the time. So what
Yeah.
was your experience?
We were selling a property, West Side Alamo, here in Northern California. It was more of a rural, horsey neighborhood. All the lots were about an acre. Well, they're longer, not wider, right? And so it was kind of a fixer-upper, let's put it that way. The folks who had lived there, they were literally there for over 50 years. And so the other homes around them had been built up. And the gentleman who was in charge of everything, he was, his memory was starting to go a little bit, right? And we asked him all the questions, he filled out all the documents. He just happened to forget one major key piece about the property. And it was the fact that when the McMansion next door came in, they did a handshake agreement on the fact that they were going to build a circular driveway 3 feet onto the property of our seller. And so we're like, holy macaroni, we have a bag of worms here. And so, yes, everybody got involved. The broker got involved, the whole thing. And so the resolution was on this is that the two cases could play out. One, the owner to the right could buy his 3 feet the entire length of the property, which is going to be massively expensive, hundreds of thousands of dollars, or they went in and they made an agreement that they would just share the road and they would move on amicably, because it just didn't make a lot of sense, because they were going to use part of that driveway for what they were going to build in lieu of where that older home was. So it worked out to be a fair deal, but it had to be all recorded. That's the most important part that we went through. But that was an interesting one to, like, your jaw drops when you hear those words.
Greg, one of the things that's so important on this, I had a situation where there was an encroachment and it was literally 2 inches by 1 inch that the survey nailed. And we were able to close the deal, but we had to have an agreement drawn. You had to have the survey describing where the encroachment was. So it was noted on the title and in the title policy, and then they insured that. So there are some steps that you have to go through. You have to get the survey, you have to get the location, and you have to have everybody sign off, and then you've got to have it recorded. So it's not a simple problem. Ours was a itsy little area like that. Yeah, mailbox that couldn't be moved.
and I had 3 feet by a mile, literally an acre down the road. And so, yeah. Another one that pops into my mind really quickly is we were up on a buyer, buying San Francisco. Now, San Francisco, that they don't find a lot of large lots where you put pools. That's just not really a thing that goes on. But there are some lots, and we found one, and we're really excited about it. And we're going to close on the whole thing. And what took place is that all of a sudden, the problem raised its ugly head. After the transaction closed, dude, we found out that it's not the city, the county rather than the city was actually the one that could allow us to build a pool. Well, there's a 23-foot easement from Pacific Gas and Electric, which made it impossible to build a pool. And my folks were so excited, man. They were like kids on Christmas. And so I had to talk them off a ledge because they were going to go ballistic. I'm like, well, before we sue everybody, let's look at other solutions. And so thank God that they were reasonable and level-headed humans. And so they could have sued all of us. They could have been horrible. But what we did is I said, wait, why don't we do this? Let's go back to the pool contractor let's see what we can build to see if we can find something that would be suitable for what you guys are looking for. Because when you're in San Francisco, how much are you really going to be in the pool, right? And so we went back and we found out that he could build a very large spa, which would allow them to do the swimming and the sitting and everything else, and it worked for their needs. They saved some money. We all moved on, but my goodness, that one, the doozy. But you have a funny one for your next one.
Before we go on to the next one, the thing that was really interesting is they went to the city and it's the county that had jurisdiction. And then the other thing is too, whose responsibility was it to look at that title report? Because if it's a PG and E easement, that thing was recorded.
What's recorded?
So and as an agent, I can't do, agents, brokers, I cannot interpret title information. So if you had been sued, you would have been off the hook. But again, attorney's fees, whatever.
Yeah, it would just been a dumpster fire, and I'm glad my folks were mellow.
Anytime you get sued, it's a dumpster fire, and you're right in the middle of it.
yeah, you are. It's horrible. But our fifth and final story, Bernice, this is one that I truly, I'll let you tell the story.
Anyway, the undercovers cover up. One of my closest friends in the office, very dear friend, was going to take a much needed vacation. I told, and she said she had a couple of people she'd been working with that she wanted me to cover, and I did. And I know what they're looking for. And of course, the perfect house comes on the market in the perfect location. It's gorgeous property. It looks like it's just in primo conditions, owned by a widow. And this place is so beautifully decorated. Everything's just gorgeous. They walk in, we write an offer, we negotiate a little bit, the offer gets accepted, we're under contract. And this woman the owner is so nice. And my clients had a couple little girls, I think they were 2 and 4, and she invited my buyers over for tea. And, I went along just to make sure nothing weird was going on. And she said, I know, so you've got 2 little girls. Would you like me to leave the twin beds downstairs for them? Oh, so that would be really nice. And she also said, be sure, she had these indentures from the 1600s when people had come here to the United States and they paid their way by working for 7 years as an indentured servant. And so the whole back side of the wall that, the living room was on one side and there was a hallway in back of it, that whole back wall was covered with these indentures. And she said they're very valuable. And, my clients didn't say anything, but the first thing they did is they went in, when they got in, they pulled off the indentures and there was 1-inch wide cracks going up each side of the fireplace that had been covered by the indentures. And it turned out that the twin beds had been bolted to the wall because under the covers, when they stripped off the bedding, they could see, and they looked and they could see this bed was bolted to the wall. There was a crack that was about this wide where the foundation and the wall was separating. Oh. Needless to say, I get an irate call from my buyers. I'm over there immediately and I'm taking notes, and see what we got to do. And, I got my manager involved immediately. And, I use my techniques that it's like you listen to them, we write down what they say, and you're hitting what do you want me to do. And as a result, my clients decided they were not going to sue us. They were going to sue the agent because she misrepresented the seller and the broker. Well, it turns out the guy who owned the brokerage was so ticked off that we didn't get named in this. He filed a cross complaint against us. So the case, it took 3 years because of the age. Normally it's 5 years because she was 78. It did get resolved, but I was still on the hook. It's a year. We had a couple, we had like 5 different levels of insurance that you're, deductible because the company was self-insured at the time. And I was short on money that year because of taxes or something. And I didn't take the $2,000 option. I took the $4,000 option. Well, that cost me.
Oh. Oh, it's an expensive.
I still made money from the commission, but still. So, Greg, what are the questions that they need to ask to prevent post-closing problems in the first place?
Number one, This is to the seller. Okay. During the time you've owned the property, what repairs and maintenance have you done at all to the property? All right. So write that one down, ask and get everything you can. Number two, have you remodeled or made structural changes to any part of the property? Number three, are you aware of any cracking, shifting, separation of the walls at any part of the property? And here's our final question, number four. Was all the work you did on the property done to code and the required permits obtained? These are very important questions, guys.
And again, depending where the property is located, if you were in Houston, it's the Wild West down there. There are not a lot of code requirements there. So again, and the codes are different parts of the country. In some places, you don't have to obtain permits to bury Aunt Sally in the backyard. So
Oh, Aunt Sally. Oh, Aunt Sally.
yeah, that was a doozy, that's for sure. So in addition to the questions that Greg just went over, here are some things that, some guidelines to follow, when you put a property under contract. First of all, and you do your disclosures, avoid diagnosing. And
Yes.
we've talked about this many times before. A classic example is, say, brown stain noted on ceiling and dining room, not roof leak noted in dining room, because you can't diagnose. You just describe. Again, and I've seen honey in my house and other houses that was responsible for the brown stain.
Those darn honeybees.
Yeah, they're honeybees. We like honeybees. Now, number two, encourage buyers to obtain their own inspections. Again, one of the ways, you may have a really terrific inspector, but just the rule of thumb is if you're going to make a recommendation of at least three. They'll ask you for it, but at least give them, some choice. And then they choose the person they want to go with.
Mhm.
The third one, anytime you do a major remodel or other significant changes to the property, and the buyers are going to be building something new, the buyers need to obtain a survey. Surveys are required here in Texas, but other places in the country, they're not. California, you typically don't do a survey. But one of the things, if your clients are planning on doing major work to the property in most areas, it pays to get a survey so that they know where everything is. And give you an idea, on my mother-in-law's house in Santa Fe, the survey showed that the house was in one position. The architect moved it over 60 feet on the lot. It was a 2-acre lot. And it was actually encroaching into an easement for the homeowners association. So, and no, we didn't know that they'd lived there for 40 some odd years. We had no idea until we sold the property. So again, do the surveys. And if you are going to do alterations to the property, make sure that you've pulled the permits. And one of the things I just want to say, just having gone through the fact we sold my brother's house, I was on title as half owner. I did not live in the property, which means that I had to pay the full taxes. I couldn't take the $250,000 exemption from my primary residence. And that meant I was having to see how I could increase my basis in the property to save money on my taxes. Saving all those receipts, tell your sellers anytime they do something to the property to save the receipts, because if they, that they can take that in their basis to the property, which means if their property sells for over the $250,000 or $500,000 exemption, even if it's owner occupied, they're going to be taxed on the balance. So again, this is something that's super, super important. Now, Greg mentioned this, and it's so important. If you encounter a problem in a transaction, the first thing you do is you get your pen out and you start taking lots of notes on everything that's being said. And when they are angry and just say, may I ask you to pause for a second? I want to make sure I get that down and read it back to them. And repeat that process. And what it does, it takes their anger down. But more importantly, you have verified what they said. And the most important thing you can do when you've got a problem is hear them. And by writing it down, that shows them that you've heard what they said.
Bernice, two of the final points that I really want people to kind of keep in mind is you don't ever force a client, a buyer or a seller to go through with a transaction if they are not comfortable. This is their home. And if their alarm bells are going off when it comes to disclosure items or anything else, either they can get their own, or if they're still not comfortable, that's one side of it. The other side I want to talk about is that if you would just walk away from the transaction and do a cancellation, it's way cheaper and easier than buying yourself a lawsuit. Because if they felt like they're bullied or pushed into this closing, then they're going to come after you with pitchforks.
But, Greg, the bottom line is here, when there is a problem, go, consult your legal advisor, get your manager involved. The sooner you get someone involved in the process to help you, and I see this happen, the buyers or the sellers may be absolutely screaming nuts crazy, and they get in front of your manager and they grow wings and a halo.
Yes, they do.
That is a chance for you to, to be able to negotiate. So again, you want to look for that workaround and avoid the litigation whenever possible. Greg, what's your final takeaway for our viewers today?
Guys, I would just encourage you to be incredibly inquisitive, ask as many questions as humanly possible, get your clients involved with you, pick their brains on everything, ask questions like I'm asking, those 4 questions we went over earlier. Ask the question of, hey, if I haven't asked it or you haven't told me, what's one or two things that would affect this property when the buyers close on it.
Just keep in mind, what you fail to disclose may leave you exposed. Thanks for being with us today. We'll see you next time.